Amazing. All right. Well, thank you both so much for such insightful talks about the future of animals and the long-term future. Would love to just open it directly up to the floor for any questions people will have, and Alistair will run over with a microphone.
Thanks so much. That was great. I had a question. I'm trying to think about how to ground this in advocacy work that we can do today. And so thinking about like shrimp in particular, I assume that most of the shrimp that are farmed are not used directly for human consumption. They're turned into like shrimp paste or something like that for animal feed or other things like that. Are there shrimp industry like leverage points or things like that that could result in like where campaigns could happen that result in like a larger industry shifts or larger industry impacts?
Yeah, the figures that I presented about shrimp only refer to decapod shrimp, and decapod shrimp are farmed for human consumption. Shrimp paste, as some of you may heard, is made out of very small shrimp who are also decapods, but those are mainly captured from the wild. They are not farmed. So if we included other shrimp that are farmed, not for human consumption, the figures would be much higher, although I got a flag that they belong to a different family. So I feel more than certain about the likelihood of sentience in those shrimp. With that in mind, to your question, I feel we're still figuring that out. Shrimp Welfare Project is doing amazing work by influencing practices on farms. And also there are advocacy organizations that are engaging with retailers in Europe. And very recently, there have been secure important commitments that to get producers to get rid of isocoblation, a form of mutilation of shrimp that are used for reproduction, and also to get shrimp slaughter, stunned before slaughter. And this is work that just started, that didn't exist 5 years ago. And some of these commitments were secured just last year or 2 years ago, no more than that. And one of them, for example, is supposed to impact an important number of animals, I think in the order of billions annually, if the commitment is actually implemented. So I don't have the solution, I'm sorry. We're figuring things out, but I think we have made important progress in just a few years that we couldn't imagine 5 years ago. And I think there's room for more, by the way.
Santeri?
Hi, great talk. Currently, insect welfare is not a topic many people are thinking about, and consequently, the farming industry is not using significant resources in combating welfare efforts. I was wondering, how worried should we be that wider insect welfare advocacy could backfire compared to more targeted lobbying efforts? Yeah, so I was wondering, how worried should we be that wider insect welfare advocacy could backfire compared to more targeted lobbying efforts?
So I think currently there are some important levers that we could act on, given that there is need for regulating the industry. And some of the welfare risks might also be associated with feed or food safety risks. Of course, there may be other risks by acting and, as you indicated, and causing some backfire effects. I think we should be careful about it. But I think there is important progress going on that suggests that this issue is actually tractable. I would be happy to talk more after out of the stage if that is of interest. But at the same time, I think it is important to support scientific research for this kind of work. Because even if we had the opportunity to introduce some significant measures to improve or the welfare of these animals or to alleviate their suffering. For example, the example that I gave before is adult flies not being fed. How should adult flies be fed? We don't know. Like, what's nutritionally good for them? What could we recommend? We don't know. So in a nutshell, I think some of the key risks from my perspective have to do with uninformed welfare advocacy and being careful about the scientific basis for making strong recommendations. I do think that there are some challenges associated with how we frame these issues, but I think happy to talk more later about how we can address those.
Thank you so much for both of your talks. It was really cool to see it all kind of summed up, and the data is scary and huge about the insects in the future. I was also wondering, Daniela, for you, if you have any data that shows the insects that are also killed by the crops, like farms on the front end of that process, because then that would even increase probably the numbers, because we always use like the pesticides, which impacts also insects and other animals. Do you happen to have that kind of data as well?
You mean data numbers? Or what sort of data?
How many insects are being killed by farming for the feed that feeds other insects, that feed other fish, etc.? Like, if those, I don't think those were included, right?
Yeah, those were not included.
Okay. Do you happen to have that on your website? I'll check. I'll also research, but I'd be interested.
I don't have them off the top of my head. We got some estimates that are way more tragic than what I presented. We are currently trying to understand which type of agricultural crops might cause greater harms in terms of numbers of individuals affected and the use of pesticides. That's something we're prioritizing at the moment, although the numbers should be taken with a grain of salt because it's very difficult to estimate, but we're trying to get a better understanding of from a prioritization perspective. And we are also doing some work developing an empirical research agenda to identify the most humane pesticide options and come up with a practical solution in the coming years. We're on it. It's hard.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I come from an AI background, but I'm a little skeptical and I find it hard to wrap my head around the concept of digital minds. So I think my question is, in the context of animal welfare and the kind of tangible impact we can make through advocacy, movements, etc., given that digital minds is a far-reaching topic for even folks in this conference, do you think it may affect adversely to talk about digital minds in the same breath as animal welfare, because we're already talking about a topic which is far-reaching to the general population. But if we add more topics that are, more on the spectrum, do we then negate the effect for animal welfare, which is something that, we focus on this and then we cross that later bridge when we get there?
Yeah, so I don't think it hurts. I actually think it might even be helpful, but it all depends on execution, on how you do it. And I'm sorry, because I didn't have the time here to explain how to do it. But in a regular talk that I may give to university students, or sometimes me or someone else, to students, teenagers, or other parts of the general public, we'll typically start with the arguments against speciesism and to consider that all sentient beings matter. Of course, you don't present them in a very sophisticated way if it's for a general audience, but they are about this. And then at some point, you reach the conclusion that, okay, so, this drives us to conclude that anyone who can be harmed, anyone who is sentient, who can suffer, would matter. And for instance, and then maybe we'll put a slide of some film, like Blade Runner or Westworld or Black Mirror, whatever. Like, we're all familiar with these stories, and when we watch those films, we feel sympathy for those characters, don't we? Yeah, sure. And but they are not even animals. It's not that they are not humans. They are not even animals. But we recognize that they suffer, and we reach the conclusion that that's bad. And everyone agrees with that. And then you point, okay, so this may never happen. It may never be the case that they are artificial entities that are sentient. But all the principles we reached at this point, pointing at the relevance of sentience, conclude that these individuals matter, that our intuitions here, our sympathy for these beings is correct. And this seems to, be something that is backing our intuitions for the relevance of sentience. And most people say, yeah, I agree. And then you can add, well, on top of this may be a concern because we don't know what will happen in the future, and maybe there will be these artificial entities that suffer in the future, and that should be a concern. And if at some point we can make decisions that can affect this, we should be worried. And everyone is on board with this. So I think it's a good idea to speak about it. And my point before was that suppose that you are into concern for digital minds, and suppose that you would like to spread concern about this, and you want to give a talk to some audience, some random audience, and you are figuring out how to approach the issue. Well, my claim here is that with this approach, you are gaining people to the cause. And maybe if you didn't have this approach, if you just directly, address it from the point of view of, yeah, in the future, they may be these digital minds, whatever, people may think it's odd, it's weird, and may not listen to you. So that was my point, really.
Okay, thanks.
So it seems like insect farming is currently on the cusp of becoming much larger, and there are efforts currently on research in cultivated meat and precision fermentation. Is there any research in cultivating like insect meat for feed for animals or for other uses?
Yeah, there was a project going on for producing cultivated insect meat. My impression is that that hasn't succeeded, or there's not much going on that front. I think one critical challenge is that the costs are way higher than producing and farming insects themselves, and even way higher than current feed options for other farmed animals.
Well, hopefully you two will still be around for any extra questions later on in the conference, but thank you both again for speaking, and you all for listening and being a great audience.